For over 2 decades, T.I. and Tiny were the undisputed royal family of the South. They weren't just a couple. They were a brand, a symbol of hustle, ride-or-die loyalty, and the ability to weather any storm. From prison bids to public scandals, Tameka "Tiny" Harris was the anchor that held the grand hustle ship steady. But lately, the air around the Harris household has turned cold. The whispers in the industry have grown into a deafening roar, and Tiny isn't staying silent anymore. When we talk about a triple betrayal, we aren't just talking about a single mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. We are talking about a systemic collapse of trust that has left Tiny questioning whether the king of the South deserves his crown, or if his legacy needs to be burned to the ground so she can finally breathe. Tameka has spent half her life protecting T.I. She protected his image when the feds were at the door. She protected his ego when his career shifted. And she protected their family when the world was ready to tear them apart. But what happens when the person you're protecting becomes the primary source of your pain? In a series of raw, unfiltered revelations, Tiny is finally explaining why the hustle and family mantra was nothing more than a carefully curated mask. The triple betrayal isn't just about infidelity. It's about the betrayal of their partnership, the betrayal of their public legacy, and the ultimate betrayal of family safety. As the layers of their private life are peeled back, a darker picture emerges. One of control, manipulation, and a blatant disregard for the woman who sacrificed her own music career to ensure his success. Is T.I.'s legacy worth saving? Or has his behavior over the last few years permanently stained the history of Atlanta hip-hop? Tiny seems to have made up her mind. It's time to stop romanticizing the struggle and start looking at the wreckage. Grab your seat, because the king's throne is officially on fire. As we dive into the first chapter of this downfall, we have to look past the flashing lights of the red carpets and the polished scenes of reality television. To understand why Tiny believes T.I.'s legacy deserves to die, you have to understand the first layer of the triple betrayal, the systematic erasure of Tameka Cottle. Before there was a T.I. and Tiny, there was Tiny, a Grammy Award-winning songwriter, a member of the multi-platinum group Escape, and a woman who already had her own keys to the kingdom. When she met Clifford T.I. Harris, he was a talented rapper with a checkered past and a mountain of potential. Tiny didn't just join his life. She financed the dream, she provided the industry connections, and she gave him a level of social polish that he desperately needed to cross over into the mainstream. The first betrayal, however, was how T.I. slowly but surely began to treat her as a footnote in his story rather than the co-author of his success. For years, the public narrative was built on the ride-or-die trope. We were told that a real woman stays through the prison stints, the federal cases, and the mistakes. Tiny played that role to perfection. Every time T.I. faced a judge, Tiny was in the front row, looking pristine, projecting an image of family stability that undoubtedly influenced the court of public opinion. But behind the scenes, that loyalty was being weaponized against her. Tiny explains that the King of the South persona wasn't just a stage name. It was a lifestyle he enforced at home. The betrayal began when his ego grew so large that it required the shrinking of her own spirit. Tiny reveals that the power dynamic was never meant to be equal. As T.I.'s fame skyrocketed, he began to move like a man who believed his own hype, and in that hype, there was no room for a wife who had her own opinions or her own career. The music industry saw it first. Tiny, the woman who co-wrote No Scrubs, one of the biggest hits in history, suddenly stopped making music. She stopped chasing her own Grammys to make sure T.I. could chase his. This wasn't just a selfless act of love. It was a requirement for peace in the household. T.I. demanded a traditional, submissive partner while living a life that was anything but traditional. He wanted the benefits of a modern woman's income and influence, but the silence of a 1950s housewife. This imbalance created a breeding ground for the first major fracture: public humiliation. Many people point to the infidelity as the breaking point, but Tiny clarifies that the betrayal wasn't just the act of cheating, it was the arrogance with which it was done. T.I. didn't just step out. He stepped out in ways that made it impossible for Tiny to maintain her dignity. Whether it was the social media flirtations with models or the very public sightings with women like Bernice Burgos, T.I. was sending a clear message to the world: I can do what I want and she isn't going anywhere. Tiny describes this as a psychological trap. By publicly disrespecting her, he was testing her limits and showing the world that his legacy was more important than her feelings. He leaned into the black love branding because it was profitable. The Family Hustle TV show made them millions and rehabilitated his image after his prison releases. He needed the image of the devoted husband to keep the checks coming in, even while he was actively betraying the woman who made that image possible. Tiny was being used as a prop in a play she never auditioned for. The weight of this first betrayal is found in the gaslighting. Whenever Tiny would confront the disrespect, the narrative would be flipped. He would use his expansive vocabulary and his intellectual persona to talk circles around her, making her feel as though she was being emotional or insecure rather than reacting to a blatant breach of trust. He convinced her, and for a long time the public, that her value was tied to how much she could endure. But as Tiny looks back now, she asks a haunting question. What is a legacy if it is built on the silent suffering of the person you claim to love the most? The King brand was built on hustle and family, but Tiny was the one doing the emotional heavy lifting for the family while T.I. was out hustling in ways that compromised their very foundation. She was the one holding the kids together while he was in a cell. She was the one managing the household while he was on tour. And she was the one absorbing the blows to her reputation every time a new scandal broke. The first betrayal was the realization that he didn't view her as a partner, but as a protector of his brand. He didn't want a wife, he wanted a shield. As this part of their history comes to light, Tiny is explaining that you cannot separate the art from the artist when the artist uses his personal life as a marketing tool. If T.I.'s legacy is supposed to be about leadership, strength, and family values, then the way he treated the woman who built him up proves that the legacy is a lie. You cannot be a leader if you crush the person standing next to you. You cannot claim family first when you consistently put your own desires above the mental health and public standing of your wife. This realization, that she was an asset to be managed rather than a human to be loved, is what started the fire. But the triple betrayal doesn't stop at the bedroom or the boardroom. As the marriage began to dissolve, the stakes got higher. The private disrespect was about to turn into a public nightmare involving legal allegations that would shake the industry to its core. Tiny had spent years protecting him from the law and from the streets, but she soon realized she couldn't protect him from himself. The flow of their life was moving away from the royal family and toward a dark, legal abyss. If the first betrayal was about the heart, the second betrayal, which we will get into next, was about the law, the truth, and the dark side of power that would eventually lead Tiny to say, "Let it all burn." The crown was already slipping, but it was the weight of the secrets yet to come that would finally make it fall. As we transition into the next chapter, we see a woman who is tired of being a shield and ready to be a sword. The legacy wasn't just dying. It was being executed by the very person who kept it alive for 20 years. Moving from the personal heartbreak of the home, we enter the second and perhaps most destructive layer of the triple betrayal, the betrayal of character and the legal collapse. If the first part of this journey was about T.I. failing Tiny as a husband, this second part is about him failing her as a protector and a co-pilot in their shared public life. This is where the private pain spilled over into a legal and social nightmare that threatened not just their marriage, but their freedom and their names. The second betrayal is rooted in the gross misuse of power. For years, the Harris name carried weight in Atlanta and beyond. They were the gatekeepers of culture. However, Tiny explains that this power began to be used in ways she could no longer defend. When the bombshell allegations surfaced from multiple women regarding sexual coercion and misconduct, the world was shocked. But the deepest sting was felt by Tiny. She wasn't just being accused of being a bystander. She was being dragged into the fire with him. The betrayal here was twofold. He had potentially engaged in behavior that was morally bankrupt, and he had allowed her reputation to be tethered to those actions. In the industry, there is an unwritten rule that you protect the brand at all costs. But Tiny found herself in a position where protecting the brand meant sacrificing her own soul. The second betrayal manifested when the King of the South persona transformed into something more predatory and reckless. Tiny describes a shift where the household felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress under siege. The allegations weren't just about infidelity anymore. They were about a fundamental lack of respect for human boundaries. For a woman who had spent her life building a legacy of empowerment through music, being associated with such dark narratives was a betrayal of everything she stood for. As the legal documents began to pile up, so did the silence between the couple. Tiny realized that the man she had stood by during his weapons charges and drug battles was no longer the misunderstood rebel. He had become a man who believed he was above the law and above the consequences of his actions. This part of the betrayal is particularly bitter because T.I. used his intellectual platform to dismiss the victims, often using complex language to belittle the very idea of accountability. Tiny, witnessing this from the inside, saw the gap between his public preachiness and his private practices widening into a canyon. The flow of their relationship moved from a partnership to a legal defense strategy. Tiny explains that she felt like a permanent witness in a trial that never ended. Every dinner, every outing, and every business meeting was shadowed by the fear of what might come out next. The betrayal of character meant that she could no longer look at him and see the man she married. She saw a liability. He had betrayed the trust of the community that looked up to them as a power couple. They were supposed to be the example of how to make it out and stay on top, but instead, they were becoming a cautionary tale of how power corrupts. Furthermore, the betrayal extended to their professional ventures. Their reality shows, which had once been a source of pride and a way to connect with fans, became a source of anxiety. Tiny felt the pressure to keep up appearances, to smile for the cameras, and to pretend that the triple betrayal wasn't eating her alive. She was being forced to lie to the world to save a legacy that he was actively dismantling with his choices. It's one thing to stand by your man through a mistake. It's another to be expected to go down with a sinking ship that he is steering into an iceberg. This era was marked by a chilling realization. T.I.'s ego had become so massive that it left no room for the safety or reputation of his family. He wasn't just risking his own career, he was risking hers. He was risking the future of their children's names. Tiny explains that the legacy he talked about so much was actually a vanity project. He didn't care about the long-term impact on their kids. He cared about being right in the moment. The second betrayal was the death of the protector myth. You cannot be a protector if you are the primary source of the danger. As the public pressure mounted, the cracks became impossible to ignore. The social media back and forth, the cryptic messages, and the investigations became the new normal. Tiny realized that the man she had loved for 2 decades had fundamentally changed. Or perhaps, he had finally revealed who he truly was all along. The betrayal of their public image was the final nail in the coffin for their royal family status. They weren't royalty anymore. They were a headline, but the worst was yet to come. While the legal battles and the public shame were devastating, they weren't the final blow. The triple betrayal has one more layer, the most intimate and painful one. It's the betrayal that involves the next generation and the final decision to let the legacy die. Tiny began to see that if she didn't walk away, the cycle would repeat. The king's shadow was beginning to fall over their children, and that was a line she was not willing to let him cross. As we move into the final part of this script, we will explore the betrayal of the future. We will look at how Tiny finally broke the spell, chose her children over the crown, and why she now believes that burning the T.I. legacy is the only way to save her own life and the lives of those she loves. The flow of the story is no longer about saving a marriage. It's about a woman performing an exorcism on her own history to ensure a cleaner future. The fire is burning, and for the first time, Tiny isn't trying to put it out. This brings us to the final, most devastating layer of this saga: the betrayal of the future and the breaking of the generational curse. If the first betrayal was the heart and the second was the law, the third betrayal is the realization that the hustle and family legacy was becoming a toxic inheritance for their children. Tiny's ultimate decision to let the legacy die isn't out of spite. It's an act of maternal preservation. She realized that by staying, she was teaching her daughters to accept disrespect and teaching her sons that power excuses cruelty. The third betrayal is the betrayal of the bloodline. T.I. often spoke about building a dynasty, but Tiny began to see that this dynasty was built on a foundation of shifting sand. As their children grew up in the spotlight, They weren't just witnessing a successful rap career. They were witnessing the normalization of a broken home disguised as a power couple. Tiny explains that the triple betrayal reached its peak when she saw the patterns of the father starting to reflect in the children's lives. The public outbursts, the brushes with the law, and the sense of entitlement that the Harris name provided were becoming a weight too heavy for the next generation to carry. Tiny's perspective shifted from being a wife to being a gatekeeper. She realized that every time she rode for T.I. through another scandal, she was essentially telling her children that their mother's peace was secondary to their father's image. The betrayal was the realization that T.I. was willing to gamble with their family's moral compass just to maintain his status as the king. For Tiny, the legacy stopped being something to be proud of and started being something to escape. She saw that the grand hustle had become a hustle on their own emotions. In this final phase, the flow of their life turned into a battle for autonomy. Tiny began to reclaim her voice, not just as a member of Escape, but as Tameka Cottle, the woman who existed before the chaos. She describes the triple betrayal as a wake-up call that whispered, "If you don't stop this now, your children will think this is what love looks like." She saw how the world viewed them, as a symbol of endurance, and she hated it. She didn't want to be the patron saint of staying through the pain anymore. She wanted to be a symbol of a woman who knew when to walk away from a burning building. The breaking point came when the king persona started to clash with the reality of being a present, empathetic father. Tiny explains that T.I.'s need for control extended to every facet of their lives, creating an environment where no one could breathe without his permission. The betrayal was the theft of peace. A home should be a sanctuary, but for the Harris family, it had become a set for a reality show and a headquarters for legal defense. Tiny realized that the legacy he was so obsessed with was actually a ghost. It was a memory of who they used to be, kept on life support by old music videos and social media posts. As she moves toward the end of this explanation, Tiny's tone isn't one of defeat, but of liberation. She is explaining why the legacy deserves to die, because it was built on a lie of protection that only served one person. By letting the T.I. and Tiny brand crumble, she is actually saving the individuals involved. She is allowing her children to form their own identities outside of their father's shadow. She is allowing herself to be the artist and business mogul she was always meant to be. The death of the legacy is the birth of her freedom. The final betrayal was the discovery that the man she thought was her biggest supporter was actually her biggest anchor, dragging her down into the depths of his own scandals. Tiny describes the clarity that comes with finally letting go. When you stop trying to save someone who is intent on self-destructing, you realize how much energy you've been wasting. She is no longer interested in being the first lady of a crumbling empire. She would rather be the architect of her own quiet, peaceful future. In conclusion, Tameka Tiny Harris is making it clear that the triple betrayal, the partnership, the character, and the future, has made the T.I. legacy untenable. You cannot build a lasting monument on top of broken promises and exploited loyalty. The fire that is currently consuming his reputation was started by his own hand, and Tiny has simply decided to stop being the one to pour water on it. She is walking away from the throne, not because she lost her power, but because she realized she never needed the crown to be a queen. The story of T.I. and Tiny will go down in history, but not as the fairy tale they tried to sell. It will be a case study in what happens when the ride or die finally decides to just live. The legacy is dead, but Tiny is finally, for the first time in 20 years, truly alive. The throne is empty, the cameras are off, and the silence is the most beautiful thing she has ever heard. The triple betrayal is complete, and with it, the chains are finally broken. The story of Tameka Tiny Harris is more than just a celebrity breakup. It's a powerful lesson in knowing when to stop building someone else's empire at the expense of your own soul. Tiny has proven that no legacy, no matter how royal, is worth the price of your peace, your dignity, or your children's future. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe that the King of the South can ever truly redeem his crown? Or has the triple betrayal permanently stained his name? Is the ride-or-die culture finally being exposed for the toxic trap it often is? Drop a comment below. We read every single one and want to hear your take on this collapse of a dynasty. If you found this deep dive insightful, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this side of the story. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications. Don't miss out as we continue to peel back the layers of the biggest stories in music and culture. Thanks for watching. Keep your head up and we'll see you in the next one.